And we are live. I I have a story to tell in just a second. But first, thanks everybody for joining us. I am Justin Lee. With me today is Danny Cortez, husband, father, graduate of the conservative Christian Biola University, founder and former pastor of New Heart Community Church in La Mirada, which was a Southern Baptist church that got kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention for being too gay affirming, and now executive director of Estuary Space, which I am, of course, going to ask him about. Danny, hi.
Hey,
Thanks for
Justin,
being
good to
here.
be here with you.
So I'm laughing because I knew eventually if I did enough of these Facebook Live things, eventually I would screw something up at some point live, which is always embarrassing. And I managed to do it just now. And the folks who are watching this after the fact on YouTube will not have seen this, but folks who were trying to like catch it right when it went live on my page, it went live incorrectly the first time with a zero timer, and then I had to restart it. So I apologize to people. It's not you, it's me. Um, so for folks who've seen this already, or not this because this is live, but uh, watch me do this show thing before. I've had Kathy Baldock on, I've had Austin Harkey on. We chat about silly and serious things. We take questions live on Facebook. We can't answer everybody's, but we try to at least answer some of them. Please submit as many as you can. We like reading them. And then after we're done with this live thing, then it goes on my YouTube channel so people can watch it who weren't able to watch it live. So, Danny, um, uh, how are you?
Doing good, Justin. I'm so just excited to be here. So
Yeah,
glad
I
to be part of your beginning ministry of doing Facebook Live. So,
yeah, I'm excited for you to be here as well. You've been on a really tremendous journey, and I imagine a lot of the folks who are watching already know a lot about your story, but probably a good number of folks don't. Um, this is a very open question, but do you want to fill us in a little, the folks who don't know your story, a little on the background of like what happened with like you were from a conservative Christian university pastoring a conservative church. What changed to cause your church to go in a different direction, to cause you to go in a different direction?
yeah, our church, Southern Baptist, we unfortunately, sent people to repair therapy, and that's still something that's hard for me to say. But somewhere down the line, I started seeing that it wasn't working. People were hurting. Different people in my community were leaving my church community and just not feeling like this was a place for them to flourish. And there was, one situation where there was this one gal that I had been meeting with. And she confided in me that she was attracted to women, and she wanted to show me a video. And that video happened to be something, Justin, that you produced through my eyes. And that
Yes.
was back in, I think, 2008. I forget when that video was produced. But if I have to say, it was such a turning point.
Mm.
Was watching all these stories unfold before my eyes and just seeing people who grew up in the church, having a different experience of what the church was when I, as a pastor, thought, that I was loving and caring for, these people who were, saying that they were struggling with their sexuality.
Mm.
And so because of that video, Justin, I started like really trying to pay attention more to people's stories and along with like theological discernment, just talking to people in the LGBTQ community, I got to a place where I knew that it wasn't, there was just something off. And that I could, for one, I knew I couldn't send people to repair therapy anymore. But secondly, I got to the place where I just believed that God blesses same-sex relationships, and so yeah, that's what got me into trouble.
Yeah. So before we jump into that, I you're getting a lot of love here on Facebook. I just want you to know. Um, uh, Colin says, I'll try to make this. There we go. Colin says, looking forward to this conversation between two valued and respected friends, and I appreciate that. Uh,
Thanks, Colin.
we've got some hearts in here, some haze and some waves, and some highs. Rob says hi, and Catherine says, "Sweet guitars, Danny."
So I should probably say why I'm in this room. I'm not a
Yeah.
musician at all, so I might look like I'm kind of faking it. But this is a music room that we built. It was kind of a homeschool project in our house. My kids are into music and into playing instruments. And so we created this like soundproof room. And so when you asked me to meet you in a quiet spot in the house, I chose this place for that one reason. But I think more importantly, what I didn't share, in that initial story was that after I had come to a place of becoming affirming in my theology, my 15-year-old son at the time came out, which totally blew me away because he was like dating someone at the time. And so when he decided to come out, he said he didn't want to come out in stages. He said it was too exhausting. So he had watched a bunch of YouTube videos and he created a YouTube coming out video and he filmed it in this room with those guitars in the background. So I was wanting to meet here as a nod to his coming out story. So
I
don't
love.
ask me anything about those guitars. I have no idea what the names are.
All right, folks. So you can ask Danny anything, but don't ask about the guitars. Can you? And I know you've told this story like a million times, but can you give us the short version of how he came out to you because it's such a cool story.
Sure. So yeah, I think after, I was in that process, it was like about a 5.5 year process for me of just trying to figure out my own beliefs. And I had no intention of actually changing my mind. It just kind of happened. It was just like I was actually resisting it. I didn't want to. There was a part of me that wanted to remain conservative, but it was just like the irresistible love of God that I think, was compelling me or something. But anyway, after I had changed my mind, about a week and a half later, I was taking my son Drew to school. And a song on the radio came on that was very gay affirming. And, it was a song that I had heard a few days before. And I remember thinking, wow, this is a song that I'm like really enjoying. And so when the song came on again while Drew was in the car, I asked my son, hey, Drew, who sings this car? I mean, who sings the song? And he told me, right? And then he asked me, how come I wanted to know? And I said, oh, it's because I like the song. And that's when he looked really puzzled. He was like, I don't think my dad understands what this, this lady and this guy are singing.
My Southern
And,
Baptist pastor father.
yeah. And so, he asked me, and so I said, oh, it's because he asked me, do you know what the song's about? And I said, yeah, I think that's why I like the song. And that, you could just totally tell that my son's face just kind of changed. He was like, I wasn't sure what he was thinking. Initially, I was thinking, oh no, did I offend him? you know? But as we got out of the car, um, I looked over at him and I asked him, hey, Drew, I noticed that you looked a little like disturbed in the car. What do you think about the song? And that's when he turned over to look at me and he said, Dad, I'm gay. And I was like, oh my God, there was just this rush of emotion that went over me. And all I could do was hug him. And I remember just weeping with him in the parking lot. Just in my mind thinking, wow, God, is this why you brought me to this journey to get to a place where I can make it like safe for my son to come out? And so he had told me that he had wanted to come out. He had come out to his brothers, a few months earlier, but he just didn't know how to come out to, his parents. And it was just such a gift. Just having that moment with him is something that I'll always remember.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Um, so, oh boy, here comes a bunch of stuff, including this one from Randall, my good friend Justin, and my
Hey, Randall.
pastor. Love you both.
Hey, Randall.
Um, okay, so David wants to know, when is he going to write his book about all this?
I've been trying to write a book the past 5 years now, but finally I met with an author and a good friend who's a professor at USC. His name is Carlos. And so we just started meeting last week, and we're going to meet regularly and just plug away. And hopefully we'll have some sort of manuscript by the end of the year. But yeah, excited about it. So
That's
thanks for
awesome.
asking. Yeah.
That's awesome. I didn't know that, so that's new
Yeah. So
information.
I'm going to be asking you for advice, Justin. I know you've
Anytime.
given a lot of thought to writing books.
Okay, so you're doing a new thing now. You've got something called Estuary Space. What is Estuary Space?
So, estuary, let me explain what the word is for some of the people that aren't familiar with the term. When I was in Hawaii, I was hiking down this river trail. And as I was headed towards the ocean, the river emptied into this body of water before it met the ocean. And there was a sign that said estuary. And I got curious what the sign was, so I read it, and it was explaining that in this estuary there's this biodiverse life where saltwater fish, or where freshwater fish would come down the river, have a place of transition, before they become saltwater fish. And I remember thinking, wow, there's actually, I had grown up in a world that was, black and white, saltwater versus freshwater. I had never known of a fish that actually transitioned. And so when I was thinking of a name for this new thing I started, I thought, what a beautiful, word, because I think even in creation, there exists a place that is non-binary, a place of transition, a place of beauty, where people are just finding themselves at a place of transition in their faith and their theology, and even like quite literally, right? Um, and so yeah, estuary space is something that I started to come alongside people in the community, especially in conservative spaces, who've been trying to process their identity, their views on faith and human sexuality. I have this video that has been translated in at least a couple of languages, into German and Mandarin, of a sermon I gave to my church, entitled "Why I Changed My Mind on Homosexuality." And because that video got translated, I'm getting this kind of just reaching more of this international community, especially within conservative spaces. And so I'm doing a lot of what we're doing now, video conferencing, and just helping to engage people who don't have a community, who lack the network to have conversations like this. So, but yeah, so it's fun. It's only been a few months old, so still trying to get it off the ground.
That's awesome. So I have to tell you, I've put a couple of comments up on the screen while you're talking from folks who are really reacting positively to the name. They really like this. I also, as I was trying to click to put one of those up, somebody else's comment came up and popped up, because somebody had, I need to explain to the viewers who are confused, that someone had just asked about my book, my second book, Talking Across the Divide, and then someone was responding, he has another book. So that comment came up by accident. I was not trying to promote my book in the middle of you talking about your thing. But since it's come up, I mean,
Yeah, go
I do
for
have
it.
a book called Talking Across the Divide. My first book, Torn, is about being gay and Christian, and my new book, Talking Across the Divide, is about how we how to deal with the disagreements that exist in our lives and in our society, and how to talk to people you disagree with. So yes, however, I'm really fascinated by what you're talking about, because it seems to me that we are, well, actually, it goes together. Like, we are in this polarized place in our society right now where it's very, us versus them. Are you with us, whoever we are, and you agree with everything that we, believe in, on everything all the way down the line, or are you the enemy? And there's not a lot of nuance. There's not a lot of middle ground. There's not a lot of room for people to ask difficult questions and to wrestle and to say, I'm with you 99% of the way, but I'm really struggling with this piece, or whatever. And I talk to a lot of folks, and it sounds like you do too, who are really struggling in that way with their faith or with the church. There's this sense of, I love my church, but I don't feel like I have a home there anymore because I'm out of step, in this one area, on this one piece. And so I feel like I'm no longer welcome there, and I don't feel welcome over in this other place either. And so where do I go? So that in between space, or that place for people to wrestle and ask questions, I think is so important.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I know that, I'm doing this. Justin, we find ourselves often in conservative spaces. And it's so easy to want to say something, just to put people down. And I think, as we talk to people who might have different opinions, there was this one. I'm part of this Facebook group of conservative pastors in the Philippines. Actually, I'm part of several Facebook groups in the Philippines of conservative individuals. And, every once in a while, I'll post something about LGBTQ that's, that I'm hoping that will help advance the conversation in the Filipino community. And oftentimes I'll get all this negative energy. Through the comments and just calling me all sorts of names and things like that. And, I know that, when I was first posting in some of these groups, there was this, why am I doing this? Why do I put myself in these situations? But I slowly found out that there were actually pastors who were not commenting on the threads that were happening that I was engaged with, but were actually listening in. And I'm thankful that in some of these threads, one of the things I did was I would find the places of agreement, and I would start there. And I would validate just the good that I could see in them, or what they said. And I think as I continue to respond in these ways, it allows the conversation, even in these threads, to the hostility to diminish, where they see that I'm trying to enter into a respectable and civil conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that's always a tough thing, That's something that I know that I've learned so much from you as well, Justin.
Oh, well, thank you. That's nice of you to say. I my mind is going in a million directions right now, so I want to ask about a bunch of different things, but since you're talking about the work that you're doing among Filipino pastors, and I want to ask, how do you feel like? I'm very aware that some of those of us whose names get brought up a lot in this conversation right now are white folks. Kathy was on the show with me earlier. Austin, I'm letting the cat out of the bag, but I've got Matthew Vines on next week. And so I'm interested in your perspective. How does this conversation look different, say in a Filipino church? And are there ways in which the movement, I didn't mean to ask you, like, put you on the spot, like a
Oh,
tough,
go for it.
but like, are there ways in which the movement needs to be more aware of the need for diversity in terms of uh, whose voices we're amplifying?
Mhm. Most definitely. And, I think, especially, as the conversation has gained a lot of traction in white spaces, it hasn't gained as much traction in API or in, with people of color. And so, one of the things I'm constantly trying to find is like, especially when I speak into my culture, Filipinos, I'm trying to find Filipino representation. And honestly, there's not a lot. And so part of my project is I actually started a video project where I'm interviewing queer Filipinos.
Huh.
Um, and so part of like this Facebook thing, I'm part of these conversations. One of the things I always tell these groups is, this is not an argument that we're that we're going to like try to resolve. It's not some. It's the primary thing is not to debate, but to listen to the voices of the queer community, and in this context, Filipinos. And so I think there's a lot of videos out there, and it's awesome that there's a lot of videos um, um, that are created. But I know that when a queer person sees another, when a queer Filipino sees another queer Filipino speaking and relating to them culturally, and someone that looks like them, there's something profound there that happens. And so, I mean, I know that Justin, this is a conversation that you and I have had in the past about, race and trying to make sure that, platforms are used to elevate different voices. But yeah, it's something that I hope will happen. And I know there's a lot of POC queer communities out there that are having to almost exist in separation from like regular white spaces because they don't feel represented or they don't feel safe. And one of those communities actually that I'm a part of is in Capia, National Queer Asian Pacific Islanders Federation.
Hmm.
And it's an amazing organization that is trying to speak into a lot of these API spaces.
Yeah, it's interesting as I've talked to a lot of my LGBTQ friends who are people of color. There's this um, a number of them have expressed a kind of disconnect, of frustration with, like, I can go here and be with people who understand this part of me. I can go here and be with people who understand this part of me, but these people don't like these people, and these people don't get these people, and
Mhm.
and and any of us who have, I mean, we're all made up of overlapping, intersecting identities,
Mhm.
and for any of us who feel, I mean, even just like, I'm a white guy, but as a gay Christian, particularly as a gay evangelical, like I know how frustrating it can be feeling like you've got two pieces of yourself
Mhm.
that often you can be with folks who understand one part or another of
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And the more of these intersecting, marginalized groups you're part of, the more
Mhm.
complicated these conversations can get, it seems.
Yeah, definitely. And unfortunately, when people don't feel safe in a group, it's really kind of they're being forced to assimilate into the majority culture. And I know that that happens often. And so even when I was pastoring New Heart, we had a group that started that was intended for LGBTQ people to meet because we knew that the space that we had as a church still the main ethos, the main group were straight cis people, And so we created a group within the church where LGBTQ people didn't have to like
Mm.
figure out, could we say this? Are we allowed to say that? And
Yeah.
it was always so exhausting for them to exist in a space, that was systemically straight and cis.
Mm.
And so I thought about that and I realized how beautiful it was that we were able to create an LGBTQ space. But imagine what it would be like if, like, the Filipinos said, or the blacks or the Latinos said, we want to create a space just for Latinos.
Mm.
A lot of times people, like in a white church, would question it and wonder, why are we trying to like separate, ourselves? Or why are the Koreans all huddled together? Why are the Filipinos all huddled together and speaking their language? I feel like they're not like they're being exclusive. They're not including us. But sometimes people of color just need that space where we're not constantly having to think about what it means to be brown in a white space. And so, as a brown person, I've had to like wrestle with my own identity and realize that for much of my evangelical life, I've assimilated into white culture.
Mm.
And that's been hard because so much of my identity has been erased that I'm like finally at a place where I'm trying to figure out, where can I flourish? And so I'm being drawn, towards spaces that of people where I don't have to think twice about who I am. And
Mm.
so if you think about that in terms of like people of color in the queer community, the LGBTQ community, there's like those multiple layers. And somehow those spaces have to exist so that they can, find a place to feel safe and flourish.
People on Facebook are really responding to this. Steve likes your line systemically straight. He says that's funny. Wendy says funny but true. Gary says thank you guys. We need more dialogues like this. Joseph says I can relate to this being a product of the African American church tradition. It's yeah. So oh my gosh, there's so much more that we could say about that, but there's other stuff I want to talk to you about too. Like we only have an hour. This is
Yeah,
uh
seriously.
oh well actually okay, well let me well before we leave this, um uh Jennifer wants to know, Danny, how can white people support people of color and LGBTQ folks in these spaces?
Um,
Putting you on the spot, of
yeah,
course.
yeah. No,
Of course.
that's a complex question.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it is listening. A lot of it is understanding that white people hold positions of power and influence.
Mm.
And oftentimes, there's this power struggle of not wanting to let go of that platform or, just wanting to elevate another person's voice. There was a conference I went to that I think Brian McLaren did it so profoundly. We were both asked to speak at this one event in Phoenix, and we were all like given like a portion of time to speak, and during his time, he decided to have a Native American speak in his spot, and I thought, oh my gosh, that was pretty profound.
Mm.
I was at a local, I'll just say it, Biola University. And there was an author, Christina Cleveland, who was invited to speak. She's this brilliant theologian. She's a black woman. And, she was being interviewed by the president of the university. And, she got asked the question, what can we do to help bring more diversity into our Christian colleges? And she said, well, all the conservative Christian colleges have a white president, a white man as the president. And she said, honestly, if we want to see change, there needs to be change, at the very top level.
Mm.
We need some of these men to step down. And the president of the university just, in front of everybody, just started to laugh and said, "I hope you're not talking about me." And I just looked straight at Christina Cleveland, and she was like, she kind of like, and that's the problem. I think, you know, um, a lot of the places of influence and power are being occupied by white cis men,
Hmm.
straight men. And if we're going to see any movement, then we have to learn what it means to step aside. And so I mean, even with myself as a straight man, I'm being invited to these conversations. And there are some conferences where I've been asked to speak, and I'm like, wait, I'm counting like four people you've invited, and we're all like straight.
Hmm.
It's like, I need to not be part of this conversation.
Hmm.
Uh, I need to, I mean, we as a community have to, like, if we're going to talk about LGBTQ people, then the people that we have to center mostly are LGBTQ people and LGBTQ people of color. And so, there's times where I have to say, you know what, I'm going to respectfully not accept this speaking engagement, because I think there needs to be more representation here and diversity.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think we all have to like look who's in the room. If there's like a room of 100 people, when I walk into that room, I automatically scan the room and try to think who's here, who's not, that I
Mm-hmm.
can visibly see. And especially if there's going to be some kind of forum where people are invited to speak, if the men are speaking more, I need to like take a step back. If all the straight people are speaking, I need to take a step back. And it's, yeah, paying attention to the surroundings and figuring out who needs to speak, who we need to listen to.
Yeah, oh, I mean, and it's complicated because, as I think you've already implied with what you just said, um, sometimes we have power and privilege in some areas and not in others. So, you and I have power in different ways in different spaces,
Hmm.
and both of us have power in ways that other people who are not on this screen right now with us don't have. And so, I think I find sometimes as a white guy when people talk about white folks having privilege and needing to step back and all of this stuff, which I agree with. There are times that um, it's easy as a white person to interpret that as saying, well, your voice doesn't matter because you're white, because white people have power, your voice is no longer important, which I don't think is the message at all. Just as I don't think that straight voices are not do not continue to be important in this conversation. But rather, I love the way you put it. It's about seeing who else is in the room and making sure that when my people, whoever my people are being overrepresented, that I'm using whatever I have to make sure that other people are getting that
Yeah.
representation and stepping back or another or using whatever I can to elevate and amplify
Mhm.
other voices, um, rather than just assuming that because people have always wanted to hear me talk all the time that I should always do all the talking.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that,
Yeah, I
do you
mean,
think, have
yeah,
I?
totally. Yeah. And so, yeah, I hope, Justin, that you keep like using your platform and you keep speaking, because, you are literally changing lives and saving lives. But I also appreciate that you are mindful of who you are, and that you have, like, I know, and in places we've worked together, you have like really wrestled with these things, and you are very much engaged in the race dialogue. And um, but yeah, I think, even for me, when I try to give advice to people who are trying to have ministries of reconciliation, It's not about just getting them both in the room, but it's also about helping the people who are in the room identify their place of power.
Hmm.
And so, as a straight cis man that was pastoring a church, it dawned on me that I was like I carried a lot of power in my church as the speaking pastor, as the teaching pastor. And there were like LGBTQ people in my community who, weren't, didn't have a platform, didn't have space to process, weren't part of the conversation. And so one of the things we did early on, I think it was back in 2009, was that same lady who challenged me, to watch the video. We actually, um, she didn't feel like she could share her identity, as openly as other people in the church, and so we actually offered her, a couple of Sundays, if you want to, do this. We want to give you space to share. And this is when our church was like deeply still Southern Baptist in our
Hmm.
theology. But it was a beginning process for me to realize, what, there's something beautiful here. And there's the spirit of Jesus that was trying to pay attention to not, there's the 99 and then, Jesus's posture of going after the one. And so one of the things that we have to do, whenever we find ourselves in places of power is who are the people who feel like they're not being heard, who don't have the power to be heard? How can we amplify their voices? How can we listen? And it's a tough thing because, a lot of times we're too wrapped up in our own, voice.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to ask you this. You and I have both. You and I have both had um, uh, transitions in our lives recently away from organizations that we loved. Um, and I imagine a lot of people who are watching this have had transitions in their lives in one way or another. Maybe transitions that they chose, maybe transitions that they didn't choose. Um, in my experience is that transitions, whether you choose them or not, can be very challenging.
Mhm.
Just as you figure out kind of what is next, where am I going, and um, and I have found it to be particularly challenging as a leader in this space, and I think both of us are leaders in this space. Both of us have a lot of people watching what we say and do, and have high expectations of us. How do you how do you cope? Because I find that when you're in my experience is that when you're in a leadership role, that you feel a pressure to keep up a brave face and to always be what people expect you to be as a leader. And I realized as I went through a time of transition, that I didn't always have the support network that I thought I had. um how how do you yeah how do you like how do you cope, like how do you
Uh,
deal?
yeah. Good question. Yeah, I'm trying to think about myself. So I've had like several. I mean, I think about the transition of our church. That was a whole different process. Maybe I should start with that one. Um, I think, there were just, yeah, that first transition when we were kicked out of the convention and when almost half the church, I'd say probably half the church left. And many of these were close friends. I went into this period of like just dark. It just everything just felt so dark. Um, some of those friends I still don't talk to.
Mm.
But I also noticed that something was happening in my heart. There was part of me that wanted to prove I was right. There was some parts of me that was hoping that, somehow that I would be validated and, that, and I sensed my heart was moving towards a dark place.
Mm.
And so one of the things I did was I intentionally spent like intentional time reading Jesus's words in the Sermon on the Mount about, forgiving our enemies, about loving people. Um, and that became, and I know whenever we get into that place of difficulty or pain, the first thing we want to do is to like get out of it. Um, but I also knew that, when Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn," or "Blessed are those who are persecuted," that's where you experience the kingdom of God. And so there was something beautiful and powerful about knowing that this place of transition, that even though it was really hard and difficult, that Jesus actually said that this is like the place where you're actually going to experience God.
Mm.
And that's what I sought after. It's like, God, I want to get out of this. I want this pain to end. But I also hear you saying that there's something about the kingdom of God, that your presence is going to be here. And so one of the things I started paying attention to was my own heart. And I began the process of making sure that bitterness didn't like grow in me. And so I began to email, the people that had left my church, friends that, weren't part of my church that had, written like negative stuff. And I began to ask, can we meet at Starbucks? Can we
Mm.
like have conversations? Because even though, you might disagree with me, I still like, I still want to love you, as a friend. And if
Mm.
I can share one story that I've shared often, it's that I remember there was this one couple that answered back and, agreed to meet. And we were meeting at a Starbucks, and I see this couple walking towards me, and they said, you could already tell from a distance that they didn't want to be at this meeting. And when they sat down, the husband just said, Danny, honestly, last night I was going to email you and say, why are we meeting? I want to cancel it. But he said, what, I decided not to. I'm here. But and he basically said, I don't know what you want of me.
Mm.
And so I basically said, I still hope that we can like somehow be friends. And he said, Danny, we see you on Facebook and you're speaking all over the US now, and we feel like you're spreading sin and you're actually contributing to the destruction of our nation. That's kind of how they
Oh my
framed it.
gosh.
And I was like, and in my mind, I was thinking, this conversation is tanking really fast. And so I could tell that they were trying to figure out a way to like to leave. And so we started doing small talk, and things were winding down. But I remember, when they first sat next to me, one of the things I noticed was they had called me by my first name. And all throughout our relationship, they had always called me Pastor Danny. And,
Mm.
that little thing tipped me off and realizing they no longer see me as a pastor.
Mm.
And so I looked at them and I said, you know what, before you leave, um, I understand if you no longer see me as a pastor and therefore no longer address me as pastor. I can also understand if you no longer see me as a friend and therefore no longer love me as your friend. But would you be willing to love me as your enemy? Because at least there we can have a relationship where love can be actualized.
That's that's powerful stuff. That is powerful stuff, man. I've never heard anybody say that, and I mean that's a conversation between Christians thing, right
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
But that's because you know when I was when I was preparing for this conversation, obviously I've known you for a lot of years, so it's not like I have to like learn who you are, but I still, I was just like Googling, doing some reading, what are people saying about Danny Cortez out there on the interwebs? And I was struck once again with how toxic the conversation gets, how quickly people who presumably don't know you, have never met you, have never had a conversation with you, don't know any of the nuances of your theology, um, are ready to just characterize you as a horrible person, a phony pastor of whatever. There's this, again, this us versus them mentality that is just so incredibly toxic in our culture and even in the church. And I mean, do you ever feel like there's more support at the polls, like theologically, politically, whatever, than there is in the middle?
I have no idea, honestly.
I
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it feels to me. That it feels to me like it's hard to have a nuanced position on anything because folks on the extremes are quick to welcome you into their extremist culture. But like if you say on any issue, if you say like, well, I agree with you most of the way, and I disagree on this piece, or I would like to bring some more, that it feels like, to me it feels like support evaporates. That's not what you were talking about, but that's just where
Yeah.
my head went.
Yeah.
But yeah, to love you, like, will you love me as your enemy? What did they say to that when you said that?
Yeah. At first they were like shocked, right? It was like it's like, how do we respond to this? And they responded by saying, "You mean you're willing for us to see you as an enemy so that we can love you?"
Huh.
And I said, "Well, yes, because Jesus said that we should love even our enemies." And so it really doesn't give us, any of us, a way out of not loving people. And it's Jesus basically gives us a checkmate. Whatever reason we have in the world to not love anybody, Jesus says even your own enemies you ought to love. And they basically said, you know what, Danny, if that's what you want, we don't know what that looks like, we don't know what that means. But I said, you know what? I want to get to the place where there's not this like wall between us. And right now there's a wall that is keeping me from moving towards you in love. I
Hmm.
want to get to the place where if I know you're in the hospital, I don't want to think through what theology do they believe, what theology do I believe. I want to get to the place where I know that I have permission to enter into the space and love you the best I can. And I want you to be able to do that for me as well. And so, for me, love has to get to the place where it's not just cheap words where we're saying, yeah, I love you, but we can't, be in a relationship. Or we have to get to the place where, or I should say, I have to get to the place where, um, you know, love isn't cut off. But I probably should say this also, because I don't want this to be misunderstood, that people who have been hurt have to put themselves in harm's way. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think, in my process, you asked me what my process was, and in my discernment process, what was happening in my own heart, and trying to figure out what I had to do. God brought me to the place of trying to understand what forgiveness and love looks like in my context. I would hesitate. I wouldn't want to like make this the prescriptive rule,
Hmm.
because there are some people that shouldn't be in the same room as people that have like especially physically harmed them.
Sure.
Um, they have to figure out what forgiveness looks like in a different way. Um, but yeah, and so that's that's kind of my part of my trying to process what was going on in my own heart. But yeah, and so thankfully they had agreed. They said, okay, Danny, if that's what you want, we'll try to figure it out. And so when, we saw each other at a funeral, not too long after that, and because of that conversation, we were able to like move towards each other and give each other a hug. And it's those kind of baby steps, that I'm trying to figure out even as I continue to, move forward.
William says Danny is one of the wisest persons I have ever met. Amen to that. So, yeah, I relate so much to like, there's this, I appreciate that addendum about, sometimes it's not always healthy, and it's tough because I think we naturally want to stay away from people who have hurt us. I think we're called to forgive, we're called to love. That doesn't always mean you stay in relationship with someone who's continuing to hurt you, and that, like, every situation's different, and there's like so many, caveats there. And it's challenging walking that line, even just with having difficult conversations. So while we've been chatting, there has been on Facebook a bit of debate going on theologically, on some points, and there is a which I've not gotten to see all of because I'm listening to what you're saying, but I see it go by, and I'm like, oh goodness.
I should probably say I don't see any of those comments. I'm just looking at Justin.
Right, it's all on me, you guys. It's all on me. But it's not, I think, about what you're saying. It's, someone had some questions and other people were responding. And there is this sense of, like, on the one hand, I'm a big believer in dialogue, maintaining dialogue with people you disagree with. That's, earlier talked about my second book. That's what my second book is about. And yet at the same time, there are times when I feel like this person is not in a place to have an actual dialogue with me, and there are times you have to step back, and knowing when to do that without just doing it every time it gets difficult, it's challenging. It's challenging stuff. I typically, when I do these conversations, I say this is the third one I've ever done, like to have a good chunk of the time be not serious stuff. And you've been like laying so much wisdom down on us, Danny, that I haven't gotten to ask you this. And somebody asked earlier, and I don't have it to pull up on the screen, a question that he has asked both of my other guests. And so I think I need to ask you as well, which is, how do you feel about pineapple on pizza? And I'm warning you, there's a right and a wrong answer to this.
I love pineapple pizza.
That's the right answer.
I even love pineapple on my hamburgers. So I
love pineapple. Yeah.
Yeah, I love pineapple. So I don't know what the right answer is. I hope I didn't offend half your followers.
Well, they can love us as their enemies. Okay, so let me, I want to ask you a couple silly questions. Favorite, what recommend a movie that everybody should see? Do you have a favorite movie that, like, if we all came to all of us who are, like, everybody on Facebook right now, if we all came to your house right now and we were like, Danny, put on a really good movie for us, what would you put on?
Oh my gosh, that would be a hard one. So my family knows that my favorite movie of all time is Sound of Music.
Really?
I even went to Austria and did the Sound of Music tour, and it started singing "The Hills Are Alive."
So you raised your son on the Sound of Music. My parents took me to Broadway shows, not on Broadway, but like the touring companies when they would come to North Carolina, to Raleigh, where we lived. So maybe all this stuff, this stuff that I grew up hearing in church about, bad parenting causes kids to be gay. That's all. I know that's phony because my parents are great parents. But maybe it's Broadway shows.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. My kids watch Broadway shows, and it's my fault. I'm still trying to figure out what it means to parent, a gay child. And I usually like to say I have at least one gay child, because you never know. I have 4 kids. Well, I'll say a little story about parenting. I remember after Drew came out, I was pretty intentional about teaching my kids about sex ed, the birds and the bees, even before they reached puberty. I wanted to like hit them um, before they reached puberty. That way it was still interesting and I still seemed like, a knowledgeable person.
Mm.
And so I actually had a conversation with my kids about like sex, and all of that. But after Drew came out, I remember like sitting on the couch in the living room. I think he was about 18 years old already. And I looked at him and I was on my computer and for some reason this thought came to my mind. I said, Drew, I just realized our conversation about sex was meaningless to you. It's meaningless to you. And I said, I think we have to have that conversation again. I saw Drew's eyes just like, like opened wide. And he said, no, Dad, no. And I said, no, seriously, I think we should like talk about it. He goes, Dad, you're straight. You know nothing about what it means to be gay. And he started to run away, and I was like running after him. And I said, Drew, I'll Google it. And then he said, Dad, hire somebody, to teach me. And I think there was actually wisdom there. I think what does it mean for us to like have a community that helps us raise our children. And I know that, this thing that I started, Estuary Space, a lot of the people I'm actually meeting are parents, that have no idea what it means to like raise a gay child or a lesbian or a bi or trans, child. And I think a lot of times as parents, we're over our head. And one of the things, I've appreciated about you, Justin, is when my son came out, our community, we had no one to turn to. I mean, we literally had no parents we knew who were trying to like raise an LGBTQ child, and we needed resources outside of our, out of our community, out of our knowledge. And you help provide that for us. And so yeah, I think a lot of what we do is understanding where our we occupy a certain lane, and there's times where we have to like step aside and learn from other people, and that's something I've learned so much from you.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Debbie says, my talk with my youngest was so much different than my talk with my oldest. I found myself looking up things I never thought I would be looking up. We're about out of time, but I since you were talking about this, I want to ask. So I've actually got a video coming out on my YouTube channel this week. I guess I should put the YouTube thing up. I always am like impressed if this works. So here we go. Let's see if this works. Oh, well, it went just to Danny. I didn't mean for that to happen, but okay. Anyway, YouTube. I'll fix this next time. The technical issues. Anyway, youtube.com/GeekyJustin is my YouTube channel. I've got a video coming up this week about for parents about what to do when your kid comes out to you. But I'm sure that I've missed stuff. Do you have any advice for parents about when your kid comes out to you? Beyond what you've just said, anything that like you're like, this is what parents need to know?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends where the parents are at theologically, socially, everything. But I think one of the best advice I could give is just listen. Learn to listen. Don't speak too many words, but listen and seek to understand. And that'll go a long way. If you just develop that listening ear.
I think it's great advice.
And I know that I've spoken to so many people that that are in their 50s and 60s, and they tell me that they still remember everything about their coming out process. They remember everything their mom or their dad said. They remember what was in the room. And so I try to tell parents, know that if your child comes out to you, they will remember everything. And it's
Mm,
really important that you watch your words. If you say something that is hurtful and harmful, that has a tendency to stick with them. And so be very careful in what you say. And the
yeah.
best to do is really to listen and to try to figure out what does love look like in this situation.
That makes me feel better about what I've already said in the video that I filmed that I'm editing now. So I'm glad it was not inconsistent with that. Also, by the way, uh, I I had to hit this because somebody said, where was it? David said, my parents didn't give me a talk. They threw a Dobson book at me, and then wait, where is it? Jason said, haha, I was given a Dobson book too. And I just have to add, I was also given a Dobson book.
Oh no.
So we we all read that same
Yeah.
book, and a lot of kids of evangelical families know which book I'm talking about. So
Yep.
um real quick, any advice for young people who are considering coming out to their parents as a parent?
Yeah. I'd say you of all people know what's when is best. Um, i- if there's nothing that is, yeah, don't force yourself to come out before you're ready to come out. Don't let anyone pressure you. And surround yourself with a supportive community. Come out to the people that first that you feel will support you, um, and do the best you can to surround yourself with somebody that you can lean on, that you can cry with, um, yeah, that can be with you in your coming out process.
Mm, good advice. Thank you.
Mm.
We could have talked for another hour
Oh,
easily.
seriously.
So we'll have to do this again.
Yeah.
Um, I made a note to myself earlier because we were talking and we were in the middle of another conversation, and there was a comment that came in and it scrolled so far I can't go back to it. But a viewer named Alejandro added a couple of comments asking about resources in other languages, and I think that is super important. And this is something that I've talked publicly in the past about the fact that, like, my first book, a lot of people asked if it would come out in other languages, and I said it's not up to me; it's up to the publisher. Well, I've been working to get the rights back, and I've got the rights back to do other languages. So I'm working with my agent to see what we can do about getting that in other languages. But I also would love for to link folks to as many affirming and supportive resources as I can in a variety of languages. So I'll just say to everybody who's watching, if you are aware of great resources in other languages besides English that you would like for me to be aware of, please post them as comments in this Facebook thing or YouTube, wherever you're watching this, and let me know. And I will do my best to link folks to those resources. And I'm always happy to hear from folks who want to help translate resources, not just translate language, but translate culturally as well. So because we do need more resources in a variety of languages and for a variety of cultures. So, Danny, anything? Oh, tell people how to get in touch with you and what you're doing.
So yeah, again, I started a nonprofit. It's official. It's a 501c3 organization. So I'm super excited about. Still trying to figure out all the like filing stuff with that. But yeah, if you'd like to get a hold of me, you can reach me at estuaryspace.org. My email is estuaryspace@gmail.com. And so, but there's also a contact on the website if you would like me to come and speak, or if you want to refer me to people that you feel like would be benefited from this. So
Awesome. Well, now you know how to get in touch with Danny. We have gone over time, but thanks for sticking with us. Thanks everybody for watching. I want to give special thanks to my Patreon patrons for making this kind of thing possible, and special thanks to my Gold Star patrons, Liz, Tom, Carol, Bruce, John, Larry, Terry. Thank you so much, all of you, and of course, extra special thanks to my friend Danny Cortez for putting himself out there and being willing to have this conversation and share all of his wisdom with us. And Danny, let's do this again soon.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Justin. This was a privilege.
Thank you all, and thank you. And I will be doing this again, same time next week. Matthew Vines will be here. And remember that you can see all of this stuff on my website, or excuse me, on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/GeekyJustin. You can also find me on my website, which is GeekyJustin.com, which is already on the screen, so I don't have to tell you that. And we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.